Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Classics Revisited webinar series. We are so happy to be continuing this great conversation and providing a work break with more great titles of our world. I'm going to just let a couple seconds roll by, let people get into the webinar I just started, and let you guys get settled. While we do that, make sure you switch your chat panel to everyone. We'd love to hear from where you, that was a very roundabout way of saying that, where you're from. We'd love to see where everybody is from and see who's on with us. Today, we'll be discussing an intense examination of the human soul in Dostoevsky's final literary masterpiece, The Brothers Karamazov. Once again, we're just going to give people a couple of moments to log in, get settled. While we do that, make sure you change that field to everyone. It used to be all attendees and panelists. Now it looks like it's everyone. That way we can share the chat log and see where everybody joined us from. And then any comments or questions you may have in the chat, people can see that after this webinar. Published in 1879 to 1880 as a serial novel, The Brothers Karamazov can be argued as one of the greatest novels of all time. It is an examination of the human soul, religious or spiritual beliefs and questions, vices and strong passion in humans, wrapped up in many discussions of choices, religion, rationality, and of course, philosophy. We are looking at today's webinar as a give and take discussion and would love to hear all of the questions that Dr. Sugrue's lecture may inspire. Today, I have the great pleasure once again to welcome back Dr. Michael Sugrue. I always love chatting with him. These once-a-month conversations are amazing. He has been our lead professor and our lead lecturer on this ongoing webinar series, Classics Revisited. Dr. Sugrue is a professor, is a graduate of the Great Books program. He earned his BA in history from the University of Chicago and his MA, Masters of Philosophy, and PhD in history from Columbia University. Professor Sugrue has taught at prestigious universities such as Princeton, Columbia, Johns Hopkins, and many more. My name is Christy Goebel. I'm a global marketing specialist here at Bibliotheca, and behind the scenes, we have my colleague, Mackenzie Karem, helping to make sure everything runs smoothly, as well as feeding you some helpful links in the chat today. We will be sharing the chat log with all attendees, so make sure you do switch those settings to everyone. I know I've said it a couple of times, but we still have some people coming in. If you do have specific questions, however, for after the lecture, please use the Q&A panel. It is a pop-out panel, so it might get hidden when you pop it out. The like button does help float the most popular questions to the top. So please use that feature if you see a similar question or something you want answered. Once again, we are looking at today's webinar as a give and take discussion and would love to hear all of the questions that Dr. Sugrue's lecture may inspire. With that, I'm going to hand things over to Michael. We've recorded his reflections in advance, but Dr. Sugrue will join us live at the end to take any and all questions. Please enjoy.
Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov is arguably the greatest work of literature ever produced. It's among the greatest novels, certainly, but it's a truly magnificent work in the same league as, say, the Beethoven symphonies or Coltrane's A Love Supreme. I mean, it's one of the truly great achievements of the human spirit. It is a psychological novel. It's also a philosophical novel. It's a novel of ideas. And it's a great big Russian monster. And if I could just give you a little taste of how great this is, I think you'll end up agreeing with the high estimation that many critics have had for this. Sigmund Freud said it was the greatest novel ever written. He disagreed with Dostoevsky, who was a believing Christian. Freud was an atheist, but the themes that the novel dealt with and examined were among the deepest and most powerful of human longings. It's published serially first, like so many great novels. And Dostoevsky is a great practitioner of irony. He's a very funny writer with often a black sense of humor. This sense of humor is not incompatible with great seriousness, right, as we saw in Socrates. But much of Dostoevsky involves lampooning fashionable ideas and putting them in the mouths of wicked or ignorant people. Let's talk briefly about the writer himself. He was always on the borderline between madness and sanity. He was an epileptic, subject to fits. Apparently, it was a hereditary problem. He was a compulsive gambler and lost vast sums of money at roulette. And his novel about the psychological disintegration of the compulsive gambler, called The Gambler, was written to pay off gambling debts, and written very quickly in a slapdash way, which was still great, because he had to get this money soon. So Dostoevsky is no stranger to psychological compulsions. He is hypersensitive, and when he was a young man, he hoped to be one of those westernizing reformers that were among the educated people in Moscow or St. Petersburg or any of the Russian cities. And what he came to believe was that it would be possible to have a successful revolution against the Tsar. When he was a student, he and other students conspired to kill the Tsar or his ministers, and it was a foolish and abortive plan. But the Tsar's secret police found out. Everyone involved was rounded up. The main ringleaders were shot, and the others were left in prison, and they were told that they were going to be shot the next day. So they had a day to ruminate on their own death, which I've been told and clears the mind wonderfully. And then they were actually marched out to a wall and with a firing squad there. And then at a prearranged moment, just before the firing squad shot them, and they're looking down the barrel of the gun that's going to kill them, a rider rides in breathlessly and announces that the Tsar, in his goodness, has issued them a pardon. Now, this was intentional, just to give them a scare, because they had been intending to pardon them all along. But the Tsar had a sense of humor, and the joke was lost on Dostoevsky. That moment of meeting his own mortality, plus whatever problems he might have had with his brain, it transformed him. And he was never the same again. When he was shipped off to Siberia to do some prison time, he was a different man than he was than when he was marched out that morning. And he ended up distrusting the West, distrusting reason, and deciding that Christianity, the kind of pure and mystical Christianity, which he thought embodied only in the Russian Orthodox Church, the other variants of Christianity being Western and corrupted, that was going to be the way in which Russia would emerge as the savior of the world. So he became something of a Slavophile and something of a reactionary, but he was an outright genius. And in the Brothers Karamazov, he's going to put together a set of ultimate questions, which are at the limit of what any work of art or philosophy, any work of science can possibly answer. The first question is, why is there evil in the world? And particularly, why does God allow evil in the world? The big question that animates the three brothers, Karamazov, after whom the novel is named, are, Father, why should I love you? This is meant towards their real father, who's a monster and has harmed all of them. And also, by implication, God the Father. Why should we love a God who allows this great evil in the world? So it's like Milton in the sense that it's going to be a justification of God's ways to man, but it's also going to be an examination of the human soul. Now, he takes from Plato the three parts of the soul, which are the gold, the silver, and the bronze. And for Plato, the gold is rationality. That's the rational part of your soul. The bronze at the bottom is your appetites and your desires, like desire for food, the desire for sex, the desire for whatever you want. And in between is what he called the silver part of your soul. And what that is spiritedness. It's a kind of righteous anger at evil or immorality. So the silver works on behalf of the gold to reduce that which is shameful and dishonorable. Well, the three brothers Karamazov are, in fact, personifications of those three parts of the soul. Dmitri, the elder brother, his name is derived from Demeter. She's the goddess of the earth, right? Ceres is her daughter, goddess of grain. And he's the sensualist. He's the bronze part of the soul. He drinks, he chases women, he carouses, he gets into brawls, he has a bad temper. He's an almost completely bronze man in the sense that he's a man of great sensual appetites. The next brother, Ivan is the gold. That's the rational part of the soul. Ivan is the intellectual who's always making provocative arguments that no one quite understands. Ivan is an atheist because he cannot solve the problem of the suffering of the innocent. Why is the pointless suffering if a benevolent God rules the universe? So he rejects God, he rejects religion, he rejects morality, and he becomes a nihilist. This, in Dostoevsky's view, is the ultimate end of the line for Western rationality. So that rational tradition that began in Athens, went through Rome, and then went through Christianity, shows up and dies at the end of the 19th century. This is true both for Nietzsche and Dostoevsky. Nietzsche responds as an atheist to this set of problems. Dostoevsky responds to the same set of problems as a religious believer would. And that's why I think Nietzsche had such a great admiration for Dostoevsky. I believe he said, Dostoevsky is one of the few people that has anything to teach me about psychology. And that points to how deep Dostoevsky can be as a psychologist. Now, Alyosha is the brother who everyone likes. He's the youngest, and he is the brother that represents Christianity. In other words, he's the silver part of the soul, but the silver has been transformed from a Homeric spiritedness to a Christian spirituality. So the spiritual, rather than the spirited man, is going to be higher and more important than the rational man, who is admittedly above and better off than the purely sensual man. So what emerges in the Brothers Karamazov is a reconfiguration, a rethinking of the Platonic theory of the soul. Each of the brothers is a fragment of a soul. looking to join its other parts. Like, in some ways, the myth that Aristophanes tells us in the Symposium. The best off is Alyosha. He's the youngest. Why? Because he has the right spiritual connection and the right spiritual stance towards being. So as far as Dostoevsky is concerned, in this case, the silver is on top, because the silver is the spiritual. This is the mystic path to Christianity. Below that will be the rationality of Ivan, which, if it is not given spiritual direction by Alyosha's spiritual insights, leads to nihilism and death and self-destruction. And that actually is what happens. Ivan adopts a nihilistic moral philosophy in theory. He tells it to the fourth son, Smerdyakov, and Smerdyakov actually kills the father. And then when Ivan talks to Smerdyakov, he finds out that he too is guilty of parricide. So the point I think that Dostoevsky is making is that simple rationality is not sufficient. What you really need is faith, and that makes it a sort of Augustinian novel. Okay. Beyond Alyosha and Ivan and Dmitri, there's a fourth illegitimate brother, and that's Smerdyakov. And Smerdyakov's name is derived from the French word merde, which means shit. So he's a disgusting shit. And he's the illegitimate brother kept by as a servant by the elder Dostoevsky, or by the elder Karamazov. And he is the son of stinking Lizaveta, kind of village idiot, fathered by the elder Dostoevsky himself. So there are four sons, actually, three legitimate, one illegitimate. None of them, except for Alyosha, knows why he should love his father. Either his father in the real world, the elder Karamazov, who's a drunk and a thief and a lecher and a generally disgusting human being who seems to have no virtues that are obvious. He's a liar and a cheat, and he's a petty criminal and a drunk. So he's a very bad foil for anyone looking for an example of divine love in this world. Everyone loves Alyosha. Alyosha loves everyone else. That's part of why, at the end, with Ilusha and Captain Snigurov, he says, we have to join as one, and they end with a cheering for Alyosha. Each of the sons of Karamazov, with the exception of Smerdyakov, who commits suicide, embarks on finding the other parts of his psyche. At the end of the novel, Ivan has become mad. He's raving. He's hallucinating. He has a long talk with the devil. He announces to the court that he is guilty, and in fact he is. Infinitely more guilty than Dmitri, who's being convicted. And clearly, he is pushed beyond this sterile rationality that he embraced in the section called particularly in the section called the Grand Inquisitor. Even Dmitri at the end says, I've always loved God, and he too is connecting to the other parts, the other fragments of his soul. So there's a drive towards the three becoming one, and you can see why that would have powerful Christian overtones. All right. Now, the most famous section of the Brothers Karamazov is undoubtedly the Grand Inquisitor. And this is a truly hair-raising act of imagination. It really is. Dostoevsky is using this to gesture at the hollowness and the moral dilapidation, the anti-Christian tendencies of so much of what passes for Christianity. Alyosha and Ivan are seated in a cafe, and Ivan, the intellectual atheist, reads to Alyosha, our Christ-like figure, his story about the Grand Inquisitor of Seville during the Middle Ages, when persecution by the Inquisition was powerful. Jesus actually shows up, starts preaching and healing the sick and doing miracles. And the Grand Inquisitor has Jesus locked up and thrown in that dungeon. And then that night goes to visit him. And the Grand Inquisitor says, look, you had no right to come back here. You asked too much of people. You made them free, and that burden was crushing on them. So instead of making them free, we made them subservient. We gave them a set of rules. They follow it. And this is actually the best they can do. Tomorrow, like so many other heretics, I'm going to burn you at the stake because I do so for the greater good. Not because I believe that any of the dogmas are any more real than any alternative dogmas we might have. But we have these dogmas so that people are spared the burden, the incubus of choice. And after hearing these threats and this very pessimistic account of human nature, this anti-Christian ideology that he thinks he is doing for the good of mankind, Jesus says nothing, because Jesus is the Logos, but Jesus is also beyond words. He gets up and he kisses the Grand Inquisitor on the lips and looks at him with benign pity. And this crushes the spirit of the Grand Inquisitor. He is overwhelmed at the gesture because this is a gesture beyond argument. We have stepped outside the realm of what you can do with words. And that is a very powerful insight. That is an amazing thing to be able to do with the work of literature. So here we are at the limits of linguistic representation. And Dostoevsky says, yeah, I'll take that one step beyond with my compassionate Christ kissing the Grand Inquisitor who has just threatened to burn him at the stake. The Grand Inquisitor, shaken, can only say that Jesus will be released and he should never come back here. And he runs away because, like Alcibiades running from Socrates, he can't stand the presence of Jesus' sacredness, of the unique divinity that he has denied for so long. So after hearing this story, our innocent, guileless, and beautiful soul, Alyosha, steps back into the world of linguistic representation, and then out of it equally nimbly. And he does this when Ivan finishes his story and looks up at Alyosha, expecting him to be upset about the representation of Christianity. Alyosha goes up and gives him a kiss on the lips. So he is taking the part of Jesus. Ivan is the Grand Inquisitor. Ivan should be ashamed of himself because Ivan should know when he's beaten by a non-argument, just like the Grand Inquisitor did. So here we have, in some ways, the high point in literary artistry, representing the unrepresentable, gesturing at something more important than stuff that can be talked about. This sounds very much like it would be consistent with philosophy as it was developed in Wittgenstein, in the second half of Wittgenstein's life, right? That linguistic philosopher said there are limits to what you can do with language. Well, it turns out that literary artists figured that out long before the philosophers caught on. And that's actually pretty frequently seen in the history of thought. The first people to figure out a trend or a movement or a change are most often literary artists or visual artists. In other words, some sort of creative rather than purely cognitive activity. The professors are usually the rear guard. The three brothers are all sons of the elder Karamazov. The elder Karamazov is a monster, and it's understandable that he would produce something like Smerdyakov, but it's hard to see how it could have produced these boys who are actually ideas walking around acting like people. That's one of the things so characteristic of Dostoevsky's writing, is that the characters are freighted with symbolic significance, although it's often hard to figure out exactly what the symbolism is. When you look at somebody like Father Zosima, who is the superior priest supervising Alyosha, who wants to enter the priesthood, his death and putrefaction, it's hard to know exactly what that means. It seems to be symbolic of something, but it also seems to be something like a symbolic wild card. You can get it to match an awful lot of possible things. So it's very open-ended. The final consideration is or that we might want to make about this novel is the scene where Dmitri is tried and found guilty, even though he is innocent. And both sides employ the latest in psychological science to prove things that did not happen and to disprove things that did happen, because psychological science is so impoverished and stupid. All right. And I think that it's arguable that the greatest psychologist of the 19th century is not Sigmund Freud, but Dostoevsky. He's far deeper in his exploration, particularly of those dark crevices that exist within every human being, that are far from rational, impulses towards self-destruction or intentional but unavoidable folly, obsession. Dostoevsky gives us a whole collection of intellectual pathologies and asks us to sort them out into a kind of moral whole. And here's the big answer to the question. Freud believes that every male has an Oedipus complex, which means he wants to kill his father and have sex with his mother. Dostoevsky asks a similar question. Father, why should I love you? Meaning the elder Karamazov, but also God the Father. Why should I love you? Given that you caused me all this misery, given that you sent me in the world, a father like the elder Karamazov is a monster. Father, why should I love you? Well, Ivan asked somewhere in the novel, who has not wished for the death of his father? And that in some ways is the central motif, because it applies to both this worldly and otherworldly fathers. And the answer, which is the big answer of Dostoevsky's novel, is that there's only one man who has not wished for the death of his father. And that would be, you can stop here if you want and have a few moments to try and think about what the answer is. But all right, I'll tell you. The only man who has not wished for the death of his father is Jesus. And Jesus turns out to be the answer to the question that the novel poses. Father, why should I love you? Jesus. If Jesus loves his father and was tormented on the cross, you too should understand that you don't have cause not to love your father.
All right. Wow. There's a lot in there. Michael, if you could now join us by turning on your camera. There he is.
Hi.
How are you, sir, today?
Very well, thank you.
I'm glad. There is so much in this novel that every time I was, while I was reading it over the past month, I was like, I feel like I need a notebook to just be taking down notes with questions as it comes. And the synopsis you just gave is excellent. We already have some questions coming in, which is amazing. But one of the things that I wanted to just start with was, and this is more key for Russian literature, I'm sure, but just the amount of characters.
Yeah.
And the amount of names and trying to keep track of them. And one of the questions that I just thought of, I come from more of a theater background. Obviously, there's a lot of literature and a lot of study in theater and everything like that. But you can only have so many characters when you're reading theater because otherwise there's so many people on stage. But, are there any characters that you think weren't necessary in his novel, or do you think Dostoevsky really truly found meaning or purpose in all of them, and if so, why?
This is a tricky question. I mean, I don't have a clear, direct answer. I'm often tempted with very long books to think that an editor is desperately needed. An example of that would be something like Don Quixote. It's the same joke again and again. The problem here is that it's not the same joke again and again. What we get are the tracing back of little characters whose impact turns out to be very big, like as in the case of somebody like Smerdyakov.
Yeah.
And I think he's trying to be, in a way, encyclopedic in the sense that he wants all of human sin or all of human psychological pathology. You could describe it the same way, but he wants to be able to look at the widest variety of human types. And each of them turns out to be alienated from themselves. And that means that they're alienated from God.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm sorry that I can't give you a more direct answer here. It's just
no, I mean, like it was one of those things, like some of the characters that came to mind were like, the Lisa Holikov, the daughter and she plays a part. Definitely. She interacts with Alyosha. You meet her and her mother with the father, with the elder. And it's just one of those things.
I know why we have her.
Oh, what was that?
Remember correctly, she's the one who slams the door on her thumb.
Oh, that's true. She's there for that.
See, there are times when I read Dostoevsky that I just have to put the book down. Where, I mean, I did not need that experience, but the problem is that this is so much more true to life. Not that this is frequent, but this is so much more, how can I put it? Genuine, that something like the English model of Homo economicus, the rational, decision maker who's optimizing human beings are only partially rational decision makers. In addition, they slam the door on their own thumb intentionally sometimes. And, that's a very hard thing to integrate into any theory.
Well, and that goes to the next question, and I do see more coming in. I will definitely get to all of those. But, the book reminded me as I was reading it, once again with the theater background, is that Ibsen was a huge playwright that I read and that I studied and did term papers on and everything. And, he's kind of nicknamed as the father of realism, especially on the stage. But there were two movements. And as I was reading it, I had to look at the dates again. And really within the 10 years that they were together, like in time frames of all of Ibsen's plays and all of Dostoevsky's novels. Within 10 years, Ibsen had written Hedda Gabler, The Master Builder, Enemy of the People, Doll's House. But the question kept coming up in my head is, what is the difference? Because Ibsen being a realist, and Dostoevsky is continuously compared as an existentialist.
Yeah.
And could you go into those two? Because they have very big similarities, but big differences too.
Okay. Dostoevsky is going to give us a representation of, or an exaggerated representation of the human psyche. Okay. He's looking for the extreme stuff. And a lot of the extreme stuff is hard to understand. Think about Father Zosima bowing down to the elder Karamazov. What the hell does that mean? Nobody knows. I mean, there are lots of learned theories, but I mean, you're not going to get that kind of ambiguity in Ibsen. Ibsen, being a realist, wants to make it clear, and if he doesn't make it clear once, he makes it clear a number of times what he is trying to tell you. He is much more directly didactic. Dostoevsky, indirectly didactic. In other words, you're supposed to understand that the audience is supposed to sympathize with Dr. Stockman in an Enemy of the People. Who are we supposed to sympathize with in the brothers Karamazov? I mean, intermittently, all of them, or some of them, but mostly, I mean, maybe I guess Alyosha, but even he turns out to have his blind spots.
Yep.
So I would say Dostoevsky's more pessimistic about human nature. Ibsen has a more optimistic, but to my mind, more sinister political program. If you've read the non-Boulderized version of An Enemy of the People, I mean, it's pretty Nietzschean and fascistic, because he's talking about those who have the right blood to run society and all the rest of this jazz, which is very inconvenient.
Well, and it's just an interesting comparison between two contemporaries. That was the word I was searching for earlier. Two contemporaries, because they lived in very different locations. Ibsen was Norwegian, Dostoevsky in Russia. But like a lot of the theories, a lot of the political statements, a lot of just the questioning of humanity in the end of the 19th century was definitely involved with both of their works. And so like that's why I wanted to ask the question, was because I started seeing a lot of similarities with what I was reading in certain characters.
There are certain things that cross disciplinary lines, and multiple authors use them. This is happening at the same time that Nietzsche is writing his philosophical works, which overlays both Ibsen and Dostoevsky. They're all dealing with a complicated set of interrelated problems.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to stop hogging you with my ultimate questions and get to some of the ones that have come in. We did have one from registration that I want to start with. Was Dostoevsky sympathetic to progressive Russian politics? And how do the brothers reflect his ideas about empire, progress, etc.? Okay.
As a young man, he was well disposed towards the Westernization, modernization idea that was popular in progressive political circles at universities. That's what caused him to join a rather inept revolutionary group. They were swept up by the Tsar's secret police, and then he had his encounter with death. Thereafter, he no longer had the optimistic view of human nature that you need to sustain progressive politics. In other words, progressive politics is incompatible with an Augustinian conception of human depravity. You need to believe, in order to have progressive politics, that people are intrinsically good. Regrettably, that leaves you with the problem of explaining how it is they became so bad. And so there's no good way out of many of the problems and the connected issues that are dealt with in Dostoevsky.
Okay. Going on that, because we all know that within 40 years or so, 30 or 40 years of the brothers Karamazov, final Tsar was assassinated with his family. We went to a more socialist regime. What was the impact of the novel within its time, and particularly regarding any impact on Russian politics?
He was, since Dostoevsky's novels are Christian and deeply critical of westernizing progressive tendencies, which is what Bolshevism is in a way. It's positivism imported from Europe, imposed on political life. We don't need democratic input. We can have centralized planning. We can have Lenin and Stalin. Now, the problem is, of course, that Dostoevsky is not going to serve their interests, because Dostoevsky is critical of this whole program. And he predicts, of course, that human wickedness will win out against these progressive hopes and desires, and that the result will be catastrophic. So if you ever get a chance to read Dostoevsky's novel, The Devils, it's sometimes translated as The Possessed, it is the worst, the most caustic takedown of would-be revolutionaries and what their psychic state really is. It's one of the most devastating novelistic critiques ever written. So the Bolsheviks didn't like Dostoevsky, and Dostoevsky, who didn't live to see them, wouldn't have liked him if he had.
That's fair. I probably started studying more Russian history in the early 20th century, so it's kind of interesting to see similar things leaking into literature in Russian, especially the political side of things. And we could probably talk all day just on the political regimes of Russia in the time. What does it mean? This is a question that came in, and I have a similar one as well. What does it mean to be Karamazovian?
It means to be spiritually twisted. It means to be tied up in knots. It means to be at a spiritual impasse, and it means that you are only at best partially rational.
Okay. I was wondering, you had brought the end of the book into your lecture a little bit, and it inspired another question of mine that I really quickly wrote down here. But we were talking all through the book, it's mentioned the passions of the Karamazovs, right? Like, it's almost like a sickness of being part of that family, is this overly passionate, bad choices, bad decisions, that type of thing. And yet at the end, they cheer Alyosha. They cheer for his thoughts. They cheer for Karamazov. It's hurrah Karamazov. It depends on the translation you read. But is this a statement of Dostoevsky's regarding how one should live? And so is Alyosha exempt from being Karamazovian versus his brothers?
All of the brothers are on a journey, and they're in the process. It will be a successful journey of psychic integration. Remember that we talked about them being fragmentary. Well, the first guy to pull together the gold, the silver, which is the spiritual, the rational, and the emotional, or the appetites, is Alyosha. He shows the way forward because his integration of the self suggests the possibility of a comparable integration of society. In other words, this is the way Dostoevsky would like to see Russia go. He would like to see it become Alyosha writ large. All the other two brothers are going to do that too, but Alyosha is the pathbreaker, because Alyosha understood from the beginning what the highest and most important thing was. Now you can see why the Bolsheviks are not going to go for this.
That's fair. That's fair. And a very interesting look at it. I actually do love the comparison of the parts of the soul broken into the three brothers. You notice it when you're reading, but without that background of those descriptions, you don't necessarily pick up on that, but you know that each brother is representing three different aspects of human nature, is how I read it originally. And then I re-listened to your lecture and I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. But especially since none of them are seen as wavering until near the end when Alyosha is questioning different factors, but being rational about it. But it's a very interesting take.
This is what Father Zosimo wanted him to do.
Yeah, because he wanted him to leave the monastery. He didn't want him to be purely
right. And this is why.
Christian oriented. Moving forward, since we're speaking about Alyosha, one of the other questions that came in was Dostoevsky wants us to think Alyosha is the hero of the story, but who really is the hero of the story?
Oh, the hero of the story is Jesus. In other words, every Dostoevsky novel has somebody who is our stand-in for Jesus. If you think about The Idiot, for example, the idiot is clearly Jesus. Someone, a very interesting person, someone's trying to swindle them out of money, and he does something which makes it impossible for them to take the money. And one of them remarks to them, to our idiot, I can't tell if you're really smart or really stupid. Right? Mm-hmm. It all ends up being the same thing. So no, Dostoevsky can't write a novel without Jesus showing up somewhere, right? In the Grand Inquisitor or somewhere else. Jesus is actually the hero of all of Dostoevsky novels. I mean, Dostoevsky has one idea, Jesus.
Yeah.
But he has an infinite playing field for it, which is the whole human psyche.
Yeah. How did Dostoevsky, changing the topic a little bit, how did Dostoevsky view women and in life and in the novel? Because there are a number of very interesting female characters in this book. Yes.
I think Dostoevsky does a very good job of analyzing the human psyche, both male and female. In other words, we have the same irrational impulses. If you think about the young girl Lisa, or if you think about Grushenka, right? The woman that's a bone of contention between Dmitri and his father. Now there's some archetypical stuff going on there. I'm sure that was Freud's favorite part of this, because it is so edible. But on the other hand, it seems to me that sometimes he does tend to idealize them. If you think about Sonia in Crime and Punishment, there she's a beacon of Christianity because of her purity of soul. It's beautiful, but there's a reason why we call Ibsen the realist and not Dostoevsky.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. One of the articles I was reading about the book, it wasn't the article. It was the afterword. I was reading the afterword in the novel translation that I had, which was from Signet Classics. And she was comparing, she's like, other contemporaries of the time with Victorian novels, like a character like Grushenka would have had to die at the end just for the amount of ups and downs and turmoil and emotional causes to herself as well as to other characters in the book. Like a Victorian novel would have killed her at the end, and here she is actually looking at almost a happy ending if the escape goes through, if everything goes through as planned, which of course we're left assuming that it will, but not, it's implied versus actually written out.
That's actually a really nice point. I'm tempted to think there's a connection between geography and literature. I know it sounds strange, but consider England is an island, and that means that there has to be a definite end to their books. Particularly Jane Austen, we got to marry these people off. That's how it ends. If she had somebody like Grushenka, I think Jane Austen would have had to kill her off. On the other hand, the novels in Russia are as vast as Russia. They just keep on going. They don't have a border. So that's why both Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, I think, share in common a tendency for the novels to end but not conclude, because, well, they just go on and on and on. You could end it anywhere because this is the fabric of real life.
And also, like that goes once again to the realism versus existentialism comparison. In the realistic world is that a story doesn't just end. No one gets wrapped up in a happy ending. It just continues on, whether you keep reading about it or not. And that's kind of where this one does end. And it's one of the questions. So one of the questions that I had for you was, and you touched on it a little bit in the lecture, and there's a lot to it. So I'm hoping that you can interpret or explain the ending a little bit for me, especially with like the funeral and just overall Ilyusha's part in the book as a whole. Like he was one of those other characters. Like there's a lot of growth in him and his father. There's a lot of growth in the young boys that surround him at the end. But it seemed for a while, except for Alyosha's part in it, it seemed for a while very disconnected with everything else that the book was about. And then that's ironically, I was I don't know if I was disappointed or pleased. It was very mixed feelings when I got to the end. And then that was the end, was his funeral for this character that had minimal impact on the overall story, but huge impact on Alyosha.
Yes, this is part of Alyosha's experience in the world that Father Zosima requires of him. This is the suffering innocent child that Ivan had been talking about. This is what bars Ivan from religion, at least initially. So now Alyosha is bringing the other boys together. Remember that the young child, the captain's son, hated him at first, and the other boys joined in. They all hated Alyosha, but Alyosha loved them back, and his love conquered their hate. And at the end, they realized that they could live and accept the outlook that Alyosha had because of the power of the love he showed. So it overcomes what barred Ivan from being Alyosha. That's why his funeral is the end of it. We have overcome that objection. And we have done it symbolically, not just using words. In other words, this is not C.S. Lewis. What this is a very different kind of speech. Okay,
I could see that. Thank you for that. Like, it was just one of those moments I closed the book and I was just like, I spent all of that time to get to there, and I'm that confused. One of the questions that just came in is, could Father Zosima bow to Fyodor parallel to foretell Christ's kissing of the Grand Inquisitor or Alyosha kissing of Ivan?
I have a much better understanding of what's going on in the symbolism of Alyosha kissing Ivan. What it is an inversion, a recapitulation of Judas kissing Jesus.
Okay.
Remember, Jesus is betrayed to the kiss from Jesus? Well, this is the opposite. This is Jesus kissing the Grand Inquisitor, and instead of betraying him, he is offering him infinite love.
Okay. So what would be Father? So there's essentially three times. There's the kissing of the prisoner to the Inquisitor. There's the kissing of Alyosha to Ivan, which can parallel each other. But then there is this bow at the beginning of the novel, and every 50, 100 pages, I'm like, oh, this is why he bowed, and then something changed it. It's like, but what would be? Is there a parallel in the book? Like, the only parallel I really found as to why Dmitri ran out so aghast at this symbol, at this action, was because it was almost a mirror of what Katerina did to him originally, and it was almost like this foreshadow of, that's the person you should be with, not with the but then Grushenka's relationship with him improved and became better. So I was like, I don't know if that's correct or not.
Yeah, Grushenka, who we thought was so corrupt, when Ivan greets her with love and respect, turns out to be actually a really humane individual.
Ironically, not until Alyosha spoke with her.
That's right.
Alyosha's presence with her is what changed her around.
Well, again, this is why, of course, Alyosha's influence on the next generation is so important with the boys. Hooray for Karamazov. But when we come back to Father Zosima and his bowing, here, this could mean any of 100 things. I mean, I honestly don't have one good. I mean, I can give you a good account of the kiss and the connection back to Judas. Here, there are lots of different ways of guessing your way through this. One that I would be tempted to do is that Father Zosima somehow understands that, despite the fact that the elder Karamazov is a despicable, evil human being. This too is part of what the Lord has made. So he says, look, I'll accept your evil because this is a world that God made and said it was good. And if he says it was good, then there's something good about even you, you beast, you monster. And I want you to see that I recognize that. Now, I don't know if that's right. I mean, I'm on much shakier ground than I would be in other possible things you might come up with, but that's the best I can do.
Well, we're wrapping up on time. I have one more question for you, but I do have to say that this book just completely inspired like a lot of philosophical, religious arguments. Like, I think, before we started the webinar today, I was like, I would have eaten this up and said I didn't have it in college, because this was exactly the type of arguments I loved getting into in college time. But can you go just a little bit into Dostoevsky literary influences? One of the things I was very impressed with how well read he was, and what he brought into the novel. Like, obviously Shakespeare plays played a heavy hand in a lot of his references throughout the book, as do some other Russian authors. Could you elaborate a bit just on his experience with literature and also just key influences for him?
Well, in some ways, the Dostoevsky novels are comparable only to Tolstoy's novels. Now, they have their fundamental difference, like right and left-handed battles in their outlook on the world and in the way they think that literature should engage with the world. But after Dostoevsky finishes The Brothers K, which is his last novel, I have a little bit of the sense, and I think many literary figures have. I mean, if you think about Alan Bloom's book, The Anxiety of Influence, if you come a generation after Dostoevsky and you want to be a novelist, you really do have some work to do, because it's a little bit like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. There's a certain sense that you get if you're present at a performance that nobody should write symphonies anymore because there's nothing more to do with it. The form itself is finished. But there are novelists that persevere into the 20th century. I don't know that there's any significant difference or influence of James Joyce on of Dostoevsky on somebody like Joyce. He's an anti-Christian kind of neo-pagan writer. He's an aesthete, very much different from the ethically focused Dostoevsky. On the other hand, if I were to look at the great German novelists, the other great novelist of the 20th century, Thomas Mann, the infinite expanse of the novel, I think that is something that Mann and Dostoevsky both have, and both are trying to create an entire universe. Okay. So they can move from different levels of detail and different levels of symbolism to create a beautifully integrated whole. So that, I would say, is one of the pretty clear connections.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. I really do appreciate it. It's always a pleasure. Always fun to just talk with you about these novels, especially now that we're out of the philosophical and political novels, but yet we're still there in the fiction sense. So it's just amazing.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. If you are enjoying the Classics Revisited series with Professor Michael Sugrue, our next webinar will be on November 9th, and will be Thomas Mann, who we just talked about as being influenced by Dostoevsky, possibly, and The Magic Mountain, which will be on our website shortly so that you can sign up, and we'll be sending out an email as well. We will also be doing one more book in December for this year, of James Joyce's Ulysses. If you did enjoy today's webinar, Bibliotheca is continually adding to our virtual event lineup. We do invite you to view all on-demand and upcoming events online at bibliotheca.com, and then navigate to our Insights and Trends blog. And make sure you are subscribed to receive webinar updates by navigating to the bottom of any page and hitting subscribe. Finally, as we finish off, there's a survey that will pop up as you log out of this webinar. We'd love for you to complete that. If you have any questions, comments, ideas, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you and use your feedback to continually evolve the webinar series we offer to libraries around the world. Just a reminder, we will circulate the chat log and links to resources in our follow-up thank you email for attending and registering. So keep an eye on those in your inbox. As always, from Bibliotheca, as well as Professor Sugrue, we appreciate your time today and hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.